Well, hello and welcome to the inaugural episode of the Ag Show podcast. I am your host, Dr. Johann Buck, and this is the first episode of a new podcast. And joining me today is a very special friend of mine and in many circles needs no introduction, but he is the Professor Emeritus at the University of Arizona Department of Plant Sciences. And I'll share a little bit more about how I was introduced to him in a moment. But joining me today, Dr. Merle Jensen. Welcome and hello.
Hello, Dr. Buck. A pleasure to be with you.
Thank you very much for joining me on this first episode of this new venture of mine. As I mentioned, I'll take a moment here and explain how I became introduced to you. Yeah, growing up in a small town, much like yourself, I needed an after-school job, and lo and behold, an adventurous individual in our small town, and this would be the mid-90s, decided he wanted to grow tomatoes in the wintertime. And this is north central Kansas, so it does get rather cold in the winter and not much grows. And so I applied for a job at this greenhouse and loved it. Day one, I opened the door, going from freezing cold outside and fallow wheat fields on one side of the road to opening this door. It was like stepping into Willy Wonka's chocolate factory inventing room. It was warm, tall green plants, red ripe tomatoes, horizontal airflow fans, bumblebees buzzing around, and I just fell in love. And within 4 weeks, I was hooked, and I approached the owner of that facility and asked the question, can you go to school for this? How does one get involved in studying this type of agriculture? And the owner, God rest his soul, his name was John Van Dyke. He passed away, unfortunately, a few years ago. But John said, absolutely. And here's a list of universities. But he said, and he looked at, and as he gave me this list, but he said, if you're really serious about this, you need to go to the University of Arizona and study with Dr. Merle Jensen and the team at the CEA Center. And, I was a sophomore in high school. So it was a couple of years before I really started thinking about college. But my freshman year of college, and you probably remember this email, I sent you an email saying something like, hey, I'm a kid from Kansas and I worked at this place called the Tomato Factory. How do I get to the University of Arizona? And it just snowballed from there.
Well, I remember that very well. This young man calling from school, lower grades, and it was interesting that such would be interested in such a cold climate in Middle America.
Yeah, and I remember your response to me was, well, here's what you need to do if you want to come to the U of A, because this is the big leagues. I was attending a small liberal arts college.
Yeah, I remember that well, Johan. Yeah.
Yeah. So Doc, tell us a little bit about yourself. Take me back to how in the world did you get involved in agriculture to begin with?
Well, I grew up on a farm in northwest western United States in a little Dutch town called Lyndon, Washington, which was 4 miles from the Canadian border from British Columbia. And I grew up on a dairy farm, but somehow I got hooked on growing plants, and I went to visit Washington State University and went into their greenhouses, and right away I knew that's what I wanted to do. And if I wanted to do that type of thing, especially in instruction and research, I'd have to go to college. So I went to Pullman for 1 year and worked hard 30 hours a week to pay for my education. And I decided that it's best that I go into the U.S. Navy and get the GI Bill so that I could come back and have the U.S. government help me pay my tuition as I went back to college. I went to Washington State University for 1 more year and decided that I would transfer to a university that I'd heard of in California by the name of Cal Poly. went there and really did well. Loved working with vegetable crops, but it wasn't in a greenhouse. And I decided that if I was going to go on to grad school, I would find a place or a professor in school that would give me a good foundation on growing crops in greenhouses. And that was Cornell University. And I interviewed there and ended up going there with my family. My wife got a job. Of course, we had no finances for that, so I had to have an assistantship. And my wife was a very good as a stenographer, and she ended up working for the person that was in charge of the 100-year celebration of Cornell. And so we were on track, and I did very well. And I was under a professor that worked in greenhouses. He was the one that developed the Cornell peat-lite mix, peat and vermiculite, artificial soils, we would call that. And I said that was exactly what I wanted to do in life. And now, after I was finishing my master's, I was looking for a way to find another university to go through where I could have an assistantship, and that was Rutgers University. Rutgers was interested in developing greenhouse industry there, and at the same time, I could get the GI Bill going to school there. With that assistantship, I was on my way to my PhD. Again, Sharon had a job there at Cornell. She was working on the centennial, and at Rutgers, she got a job as the head secretary to the organizer for the 200 celebration at Rutgers. And so we got to meet Adlai Stevenson and a number of important people that came to these universities. But anyway, I got my degree there at Rutgers, and then I heard about a job opening here at University of Arizona, and that training would be toward being a horticulturalist in a country I'd never heard of, Abu Dhabi, United Arab Emirates, and that that was really a wonderful job. Located on a barren island in the Persian Gulf, living with the Bedouins and building greenhouses, 5 acres in an area where they didn't have snowstorm, but they had sandstorms, and we were able to conquer the elements of the desert by going in a greenhouse and producing yields that, well, I can tell you, the story was told worldwide, and a number of newspaper and magazines and television shows came out of that. And next thing you know, I'm trying to make it quick here. Next thing you know, I was working with Walt Disney on Epcot as the senior designer of the Land Pavilion, which now has had 200 million people through that. And but recently retired, not too many years ago, from the U of A, but still have great interest in controlled environment agriculture, which is a term we developed here at the University of Arizona.
And many, 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 many other events and projects in that time. I mean, how many countries have you've
Uh,
consulted and worked in at this point?
yes, I worked in about 45 countries and spent a lot of time in an airplane traveling to those countries. I have now, with American Airlines, 1.8 million miles with American Airlines, but yeah, my days of doing that kind of travel have been reduced. I decided to spend more time at home, and my favorite hobby is gardening. I love growing plants. We grow plants exceedingly well, but still, here at the University of Arizona, I developed the Controlled Environment Agriculture Center with support from the state of Arizona. After visiting with the governor, I told her what we needed, and she helped finance that. And today we have this center of 3 full-time PhD professors and roughly 100 students that come through our program. And Johan was one. And he had a professor that we had brought from Japan, who spoke fluent English. And Johan ended up working with Dr. Sherry Kaboto. And well, the rest is history. We're well known at the University of Arizona. Anyone can Google the Controlled Environment Agriculture Center, University of Arizona, and get the full information on how that all started.
And I want to come back to Cornell when you studied with Dr. Sheldrake, the Cornell peat light mixes, they were quite revolutionary at the time, right? I mean, soilless media at that time, what was very little development, right? This was something fairly new.
That's correct. And what was occurring up until then is that the, the industry, the greenhouse vegetable industry, was mainly in Ohio, in the Cleveland area, and they would have to steam sterilize that soil every year to get rid of the pathogens. But unfortunately, the steam only went down the control and the control of any diseases, root diseases, by steaming, only went down 12 inches, and the tomato roots would go down 4 feet, up to 4 feet. So that's what it really said. And Dr. Sheldrake, through his guidance, said we got to go under a not only controlled environment for the upper atmosphere, but controlled root environment. So we took the Cornell peatite mix, which was designed for growing bedding plants, and we had adapted that to growing vegetables. The next thing you know, because of that work, of course, I went to Rutgers University, and, uh, and that was the beginning of using soilless media, along with work that was done in England and Scandinavian countries. They also had their ways of growing, but I would say the use of the Cornell peatite mix has gone worldwide, and today that's commonplace in the industry. And other soil media has come along, whether it be vermiculite and peat moss, um, or perlite, or just growing in flood and drain, where you have a, uh, a small rock stone environment for the plants to grow. And there are many ways that we could anchor that plant, and it all comes down to economics and what you use.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, so from Cornell went to Rutgers, and that was around the time. Were you there during the time or before or after when Professor Roberts was working on the double poly for greenhouses?
Yeah, when I came there, he was developing that, and he had that in a small research greenhouse, very small. And he said, I'd like it. And I had a big greenhouse, about 2,000 square feet. And he said, I'd like to try this idea in your big greenhouse. And I said, my thesis is revolves around that, and I can't have any failures. Why? He said, it's going to work. So I trusted him. And what we did was put 2 layers of poly on the greenhouse. Now, we used to put one layer on, then we had a two by 1 inch strip that we'd put over the structure that held the poly of the greenhouse up, and we would put that poly on, put 2 inches and then 2 inch bar over the top of that, and then another layer of poly. So we had 2 layers, and 2 layers would give us 40% heat saving um, over just one layer of poly. So he said, I want to do it where we not put a, 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 um, a structure between the 2 layers, which was wood. He said, I want to put air between. And he said, I said, well, let's try it. I said, it sounded like an idea that would work. And guess what? It worked. It worked great. And you see that idea throughout the world today. But it all started between a combination of Cornell and Rutgers. It was a time of revolution in controlled environment, and fortunately, I had a chance to be a part of that.
Yeah, that's so neat. It was interesting that to come to find out that information, because the greenhouse that I started in, this was back when greenhouse technology, the sidewalls were still fairly short, and we had double poly roofs, and I sure got a good lesson in how to install those roofs, which is not easy at the time. So then from Rutgers, you find this opportunity out in Arizona. What was the ag department like at the U of A when you arrived?
Well, I went there, and you know, there were a group of young people. In fact, they were in astrophysics, and they understood engineering, but didn't have a clue on growing. And they approached the Rockefeller Foundation on a grant, and Rockefeller said, "You're going to have to find someone that knows how to grow plants." So I came down to interview, and I remember my professor from Cornell came with me. He said, "I've heard about these people, but I don't know if you really want to work there." And I went there and I said, "Wow, I think I can do something." And not only that, they had a grant from the Rockefeller Foundation to do a facility in Puerto Penasco, Mexico. And I said, "Wow, what a great opportunity to do international work." And so we did that, and guess what? It worked well. And we had visitors from throughout the world. If it wasn't from Israel or Saudi Arabia or countries in Holland, countries in Europe like Holland and England, we were doing revolutionary ideas. And when it wasn't with only me, but we had great engineers and other agriculturalists that worked on this. And as a team, we did that. Now, I worked on soft money for 19 years, and I knew we had to succeed. Otherwise, I was going to have to find another job. But we succeeded. Next thing you know, the university said, "We would like to bring you on campus from where you were working in the environmental research lab, way off campus." And I did that, and I came as an assistant dean. But meantime, spent a lot of time lecturing, and especially when Walt Disney contacted us and said, "We want to do your kind of thing in the land pavilion at Epcot Center, the experimental prototype community of tomorrow." And a lot of people doubted whether we could do that. And I said, "Don't worry. We know a lot about growing crops hydroponically, and we'll make this system dance, and it will bring people from throughout the world." And that's happened. Like I said, 200 million people have visited the land pavilion, designed again by the University of Arizona's Environmental Research Lab.
How did the Controlled Environment Ag Center come to be? That's near and dear to my heart, your heart, and many others, staff, faculty, fellow graduate students, past and present.
Well, it's interesting. It's the the whole system of doing thing at any version is very regimented, but I would never follow that. If I had an idea, I just do it. And so I heard that the governor was interested maybe in our systems by a visitor from her chief of staff, and I went to visit the governor, and I said I needed so many million, so many hundreds of thousands per year to do that, and she helped fund a facility that we built called the Controlled Environment Ag Center, and it was very, very successful. Not only in what we developed in the state of Arizona and in the United States, but we brought a whole team of other scientists, and like I said, we have over 100 students per year coming through that.
Yeah, a lot of students, a lot of great program. I look back fondly on that and appreciate not only yourself but Dr. Kubota, Gene Giacomelli. You were all on my committee, and which, as you know, it wasn't easy for me at first. I remember, coming there and all gung ho, excited, ready to go, and within a few months, quickly found myself in a situation where I thought I might be in over my head. But fortunately, I had a good relationship with you and Dr. Kubota and Gene, and we had kind of this coming to Jesus meeting, and I expressed my frustrations because I remember early on there was one student from Cornell, right? I came from this small university in Kansas nobody hears of, Fort Hays State University. Go Tigers! And I remember Dr. Kubota had a couple of graduate students that enrolled the same semester I did from big caliber universities, and within a few weeks they were gone. I thought, where'd they go? Oh, they couldn't handle it. What do you mean they couldn't handle it? What's going on? And I quickly and realized that myself. I remember Dr. Kubota said something like, "I need you to go in and set up your environmental sensors and start running statistics." And I had a high-low thermometer in the greenhouse, so I set that up and I said, "All right, I'm tracking the temperature." And she said, "No." So fortunately, her husband and assistant, Mark Krogel, what a great guy, helped me set up those systems. But it's an amazing facility. Continues to generate revolutionary research. We worked on a great project. I look back fondly on picking those tomatoes early in the morning and you showing up early and walking in and saying, I knew you'd be here, and then go down and grab some breakfast burritos from McDonald's.
Well, those are all, every lot of graduate students who succeed, have to do long hours and have some innovation, some ways to add things to the to make this a scientific kind of thing, so they can get a thesis out of that. And you did well at that. And uh, a lot of young people don't want to go on for a master's or a doctorate degree, but if you want to work at a level of development and have ideas that you want to be able to work on and research through research grants through a university or a company, that can be done. But it's a lot of midnight oil, a lot of long work, but it's worth it. And I just can't tell you how I was so lucky to have professors that were indeed expected a lot from me. But I remember when I was at Cornell, my professor said to me, he said, I've got five people from Holland to come and see our work. And I said to him, well, he said, what's the deal? And I said, well, I don't have any good pair of shoes to wear. They've got holes in the soles. He said, I'll tell you what, I got a pair that will fit. You come on over and I'll give you my shoes to wear. And that's what we did. and and luckily, my wife Sharon had a good job, but enough to put beans on the table, you might say. But
Mm-hmm.
and it all was worth it. But was long hours. And I remember when I came to Cornell, pulling a U-Haul trailer in a little Chevy too. And my professor, I called him. I said, I'm here, and I have my daughter with me, and she's quite sick. I need a doctor. He said, wait, I'll be out to see you. I'll come out to Varna and see you. And he told me where the doctor was, and he said, I'll see you next morning at the greenhouse. And and so we got the daughter a good doctor, but the next morning I had my footing on my first systems of controlled environment ag.
How about that? That is important. And then, looking back on graduate school, uh, that means a lot to have, your major advisor and your mentors, those on your graduate committee, especially major advisor and those that um, help support in that way. I mean, because it's not easy. It's long hours. You're not only doing research, but you're doing your schoolwork, and graduate studies is different than undergrad. And unless you go through it and do it, I don't think people quite understand that process. It is challenging, and yeah, and I look back on it fondly. There were moments during that time where I was probably, yeah, whispering under my breath, frustrations. But I mean, that's just the way it goes. You're working towards something bigger and trying to achieve. You're put a dent in the knowledge base and work on great projects. So that's important. Um, I mean,
Yeah,
you've done a lot of.
I
Go
would
ahead.
say, Johanna, one of the important things for young people is that you not only work hard and work on new ideas, but you got to get those ideas out to the public and have them used. In my case, they were used worldwide, and there was a great deal of satisfaction that my work has gone into 5 languages, and to this day, we're cited. I always go back. You can find ways of people who have cited you, and it's a lot of people that have used that basic science in their own work, and it's how we're going to feed our population are these new concepts and developments.
Yeah, and that's one thing you did really well for the university. I mean, you taught one class, and when I mean say one class, it was one class, one semester, correct? And then it really became this effort to build essentially brand awareness of the University of Arizona and controlled environment agriculture. I mean, you were always bringing people through and really not only just demonstrating what we do. I mean, it was really, people were entertained. And that, I think, was a difference maker compared to maybe other universities. I don't know how they do things, but I just know from my experience during my time at the University of Arizona, when you were highly active, and that marketing is really important. That's what led so many companies to come there. We had phenomenal, and still have, not had, have phenomenal faculty at that facility at the University of Arizona. And there are other facilities that are up and coming, which is great to see CEA kind of have this growth over the last 22 years. With Ohio State University, where Dr. Kubota is now at, Cornell, like Neil Mattson doing a great job at Cornell University. But that was one of the things that was really fun to watch. Was here we are doing research, academic research, applied and basic research, and you'd bring people in, and people would just leave giddy, excited, and holy cow, that was an experience. And I think it's important that people learn from that, because if they want their facilities to succeed, I think you need to have that as well. It's serious business, but if people enjoy it and they have a good time and they like, wow, this is important and it's fun too.
Yeah, we one of the things we did is that we did a lot of work in Mexico, and as a result of our work, we put it into Spanish. And I used to go down to Mexico every year for Meister Publications, and I would lecture to between 700 to 1,000 people. And today the industry is huge in Mexico, and we because of that going down there and doing that work, we feed a lot of people. So that work in Mexico, and I would say that a lot of that work in Mexico is feeding vitamins and minerals through vegetable crops coming up across the border, especially during our winter months when it's warmer down there. The cost of heating is not as great down there as it is in the United States, and so it's something that is very important in one's diet, that vitamins and minerals are provided. People don't realize just peppers alone are tremendously important from the standpoint of getting the required vitamins. And so we do all of that in a controlled environment.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's 100%. So I want to ask you, of all the projects that you've done. I mean, I've heard so many stories. We just don't have enough time to go over some of those stories. But I mean, you've worked on some really interesting projects. Are there any that stand out to you, that are most memorable?
Well, I think there were three. Abu Dhabi, of course, was extremely exciting. Uh, the one we did for the Shah of Iran in Karg Island was another exciting one. And then I think the other one was the work with Disney, because of the thousands of people that would go through the land pavilion and see that. And we had great educational programs. We had a number. They offered scholarships to students throughout the United States. We would have anywhere from five to 10 students there for 6 months to a year at Disney, where they learned the science, but at the same time, be working with Disney, they learn how to tell the story by where they would come through the backstage background in the greenhouses. We'd take tours through, and we through that so that because of that contact we had with the general public, I think has made a major contribution in growing crops, feeding this country, the United States, through that work that we did starting over 50 years ago.
And as far as we've come, a lot of emphasis now seems to be, vertical farming, indoor production. Greenhouses in the U.S. continue to expand. Like there's a tremendous amount of growth in Ohio. A lot of vertical farming. I mean, you've seen this from its infancy in the U.S. until today. And vertical farming is not without its challenges. Just a couple of weeks ago, a couple of companies announced that they're closing their doors. What are your thoughts on on vertical farming and also beyond that, what do you see as the future of CEA based on where we're at today?
Well, there's a lot of enthusiasm for vertical farming, but you have to remember that you're in an enclosed structure, and the electrical cost can be very high because in a structure that's vertically that may go up 20 to 30 feet, is that you got to bring that heat from the top back down to the bottom. And then you got to have artificial lighting to go with that. Not only that, you got to have heating, or you got to have refrigeration, depending what time of the year you're doing that. So the energy cost can be very high. And I think that unless you're in an area where you can receive a return from your product high enough, and we see vertical farming, but in areas where people can afford to pay that kind of money for the product, and then that's fine. But my interest in is go to the roots of the world, and I don't care if it's in China. Again, I have books. Books that have been my books have been translated into 5 languages, and that's what's important to me, is that how we feed people vitamins, minerals. You could have rice and you can have potatoes, and they're the major carbohydrate crops that give you energy, but you got to have the vitamins and minerals that go with it. Vegetables are required. We need that, and to have fresh vegetables that are affordable to the poor is very important, and that's what we're doing. And to this day, I still work with organizations, whether it's in Palestine or Israel or the Middle East. It's not uncommon for me to be answering questions and working with groups on this technology that to us it's old but new for many people.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Yeah, especially on providing for people in that was one of the draws to me of a controlled environment agriculture was here you have this technology where if you're in an area geographically that has, let's say, it's limited in its resources, maybe it doesn't have arable land or water or any number of factors, controlled environment agriculture offers the advantage to where you can grow crops and some oftentimes unique crops and very, very nutritiously important crops in areas that you might not otherwise because of those geographical constraints. That's what drew me to agriculture or CEA was I thought, wow, because this could really change the world. This has the potential to help people who might not otherwise have access to nutritious food. And I want to ask you a question. I don't struggle with this, but I come across it quite a bit because I do work in both field ag and controlled environment agriculture. And I know you've spent a lot of time in field ag as well. I know growing up, some of your closest friends own some of the largest field operations in the U.S. What would you say, as we're both advocates of controlled environment agriculture, what would you say to those that are in CEA that maybe kind of have tunnel vision and maybe really advocate strongly for CEA to the point where they might say their opinions of field ag are not very good, but I often wonder if do they fully understand the advances and importance of field agriculture. You know what I mean? They kind of have this one-sided view that CEA is the solution to all of our agricultural problems.
Well, I'm going to tell you this right now is that what we have, what we have existed in regard to field agriculture is going to come slowly to a halt. And there's an issue called water. We are running short on water. And Lake Mead and some of the lakes in the West are far gone down in their volume. So we're not going to be using water and a lot of it wasted as we apply it in the field through furrow or flood irrigation. We're going to have to go under a controlled environment where we can put the water through and put fertilizer in the water going through drip irrigation onto the crops to get 150 tons per acre rather than 10. And the thing is that we're going to see such agriculture. And not only that, But and when we haven't talked about this, we have included aquaponics where we're growing fish, and the fish is tilapia. And tilapia is one that Israel for years has used from the Sea of Galilee. We've now taken that fish, tilapia, and incorporated that as a part of our growing system, where we can take that wastewater that has the excrement from the fish fertilizer, and that going onto the plant. So it's a kind of a combination companion crop we're having, animals and plants. And there's increasing interest on that in ways that we could do this economically. And yeah, it's, I think that as we have increased populations in the world with water shortages, we're going to have to go into more controlled environment. And it's happening. There's no doubt about it. It's happening. And so what you have to do, you're going to have to, and I don't like to say we train people. I always tell people that in the circus, they train monkeys. But in agriculture, we educate people, not train. We educate people to use their hands and their brain in order for the feeding the future in our world.
Yeah, I agree with you on many accounts there. I think what I my is my opinion. What I see is increased technology in field ag, drip irrigation technologies, as simple as cover crops for soil erosion, improving soil, um, and really kind of figuring out which crops are best for field ag versus controlled environment, and where we can fit controlled. The answer is all of the above. That was my point. Is kind of hit these two camps. Well, field ag, controlled environment ag. No, with all these people and all these, it's all of the above. That's for our agriculture. We'll increasingly see more and more CEA, but as far as agriculture as a whole, what's the solution to feeding our growing populations? It's going to be a combination of everything, because we're not making any more land. It's being developed. You know as well as I do, living here in Arizona, we see increasingly arable land be developed. That's less land for crops, which means we're going to have to get that food from somewhere. Water's going down. The quality of water is not that great. I talked to an extension agent at the U of A earlier this week, and he said, we use, I think 74% of the water from the Colorado River that we use is for agriculture. And he said the majority of that water alone is used to flood the fields to push that salt deeper down in the soil profile. So even the water that's being used on the fields isn't for agricultural production. So that's a problem. If we can do that, then we work on reducing the water usage for agricultural production.
Yeah, and that's one of the excuses the people that flood irrigate is to drive the salt down. And the thing is that the reason why they have so much salt because they use so much water. And the thing is that what you can do with drip irrigation is that yes, you will have a salt. The farther that moisture goes away from the drip system, it becomes salty. But we know that when it rains, you got to add the water to that because that salt will then come into the plant roots and will damage it. So when it's going to rain, you add water and go to field capacity so that water that area that's high in salts won't come into the root system. So it's a management thing. And I know that a lot of people still use technology developed during biblical times. That's not going to make it today. We've got to use today's science to feed everyone, and it's limiting water. And it's engineering and horticulture put together, and it's reasons to understand it and why you do that, and at the same time have a sharp pencil so that you can get the economics worked out. But it's happening more and more and more and more. Is that we're going to these systems, but again, you got the traditionalist, and a lot of the older professors are somewhat resistant to adapt to new, but we're getting there because there's no other solution.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I brought something out for a little bit of nostalgia here before we come to a close, because I may have one or two more questions, but I want to show you something. Speaking of retirement, because now you are more officially retired than you were in 2003 when, can you see that?
Yeah, yeah.
It's your retirement celebration brochure from September of 2003. So I didn't even know I had these. I was going through some books the other day and this slipped out, and I thought, how funny. So I remember you said we were going to retire, and that was '03, and you're still growing strong. Are you working on any projects actively now, or are you just kind of taking things as they come and just enjoying your family?
Now, I'm not working on any active projects now. It's time that I take some time out and do work on work that I love to do. And I still have I still lecture at the university, and because of my lectures and because of the questions that come out, I can see the all stars there. So about 1 out of 10 or 2 out of 10, they're all stars. And I come to visit and I see them working in the greenhouse, and I'll spend time with them. And that's what I really enjoy. And at the same time, I got a granddaughter and other things, but I still love to grow. I still love to do what we're doing right now, just to tell the story and to reach as many people as possible, because I know what we have to do, and we got to just get the gospel out there.
Yeah, yeah. And I want to thank you for joining me today to help spread that. That we'll see how far this podcast goes. I know a lot of people are excited for me to start this new podcast, and I'm very, very fortunate to have you on as a guest. I'm even more blessed to have you as a friend. Go from mentor to a friend, and it's nice to be able to say that, even with Dr. Kubota. Met with her in Cultivate in last July, and it's exciting to see how her career has progressed. Because I think I was one of her early graduate students here when she moved to the United States and was teaching at the U of A, and just to see accomplishments of that, and to see Dr. Giacomelli now out, consulting and doing his thing, and her fellow graduate students and what they're doing. It's really cool to see, and everybody in their own way is getting the story out there and doing a lot of great work.
Yeah, it was Dr. Kubota that I used to lecture to when she was just a graduate student under Professor Takakura, and she was introduced to University of Arizona through my lectures in Japan. And so we do attract some all stars, and she was one of them. And that's it's good to know that her basic work in science, and her husband Mark, here at the University of Arizona, now has been spread through Ohio State University, and it's her work that brought Ohio to the surface again as one of the more knowledgeable institutions on controlled environment. So it's been a great career, Johan, and I really enjoyed working with you, and uh, and there's a lot of opportunity for young people, and you just have to work, and you'll get there.
Absolutely. Dr. Jensen, thank you very much. And if you'll hold tight, I'll end the podcast, and just hang tight with me as it wraps up. But I also want to thank the listeners for joining us on this episode of the Ag Show podcast. And I hope you enjoyed this episode with Dr. Jensen, and look forward to producing additional episodes. We have exciting guests coming up, and we're going to cover everything agriculture. So this was just the beginning, and this one really meant a lot to me because this is where I got my start in agriculture, and Dr. Jensen was instrumental in my success in getting to the University of Arizona and throughout my professional career. So again, thank you very much,
One
Dr.
thing,
Jensen, and hold tight.
one thing in closing,
Yes,
you
please.
can get a lot of my papers by Googling me, Merle Jensen, University of Arizona, and a lot of my papers are there. They can get those papers just by Googling me, and it will be very helpful for them.
Yes, I'm sorry. I should have asked that. Where can people find information about you? Your book as well. I think I've got a copy here somewhere.
Yeah.
No, I don't. What is the name of the book where that's translated into 5 languages, so
Well,
people can look for that as well?
I'll get it here. It's called, this is right here. Can you see it?
I cannot see it. It's a little
It's
blurry.
called the Saadiyat Miracle, called Zayed. Unfortunately, the book is not on Amazon. I'm hoping that they will do that, but it tells the stories of the early controlled environment in the Middle East. And and also, again, a lot of those early papers we did on controlled environment, they can get that by just googling my name, and they'll get those, and they can print those off.
And I'll put some of that information in the show notes. I can get links to some of those. I can also get the title from you and list it there. So if and when it's ready for mass production, people can purchase that. And yeah, because I don't. You're probably not very active on LinkedIn or do any of the social media. So if people want to learn more, they can just search your papers.
Right. That's right. Exactly.
Yep.
Yep.
Okay.
Good.
Anything else before we wrap up?
It's been good. Thank you. It's good to get.
And thank you. Okay, hang tight.
Good luck.